Okay, welcome back. We're on page 183 talking about how all this stuff fits together. So, normal operations are going along. I did a backup at midnight. And then, bam, something happens at noon. So my recovery point objective is going to bring me back to midnight. And then, maybe I can get the thing running in 5 minutes. But it's going to take 2 hours to re-enter all the data. So that's 2 hours plus, 5 minutes, right? The combination of the two, right? Okay. So the maximum tolerable downtime is how long it takes to get the system back up and running and redo anything that needs to be redone. And then we're going back into normal operations. But let's look at this. The system is down, the system is recovered, the data is recovered, and we should do some testing and validation. But I tell you the truth, when people are screaming at the top of their lungs, when's the server going to be back? Testing and validation probably doesn't get done that often. So let's talk about cost balancing, because again, you're not going to be able to do everything. Here's the cost to recover something. So if I have a system mirror, that means when the system goes down, I just switch over to the other machine. If this machine caught on fire, all I have to do is just switch over to the other machine because it has a live copy of everything, and great. So my disruption is practically nil, but it costs a lot of money. Okay, so if I'm using tape backup, it's going to take a long time to get it back, but it's pretty doggone cheap. So what do you want? Well, you want something in the middle, where the cost of disruption and the cost of recovery is somewhere kind of in the middle here, because you can't go all the way to this side on doing tape backups and spending 4 hours doing a restore. And you can't do this all the time by saying there's no downtime whatsoever. So, because it just costs too much. So and this appetite for cost is kind of what's hard to come up with. So I talk about the recovery requirements. Here's kind of an example of what we're talking about. So we're doing some sort of preparation. Oh, that's not it. I hate it when my graphics don't work. Anyway, page 185, talk about an example resource and then the components involved in that. It's just, it's the same people that are restoring the system. So you can't say, well, restore mine first. No, if it's on a tape, for example, if it's on a tape, I'm not going to restore them in the order what it is in the tape. And, I'm sorry, if your organization, if the files were in alphabetical order, then accounting is going to be first, and then production and sales is going to be kind of last, because that's how it lays out on the tape. Yeah, okay. So recovery priorities, what goes first? And again, you're not going to be able to decide this. Somebody else is going to have to help you out. Contingency planning policies. So the BIA should be the policy guidance for all the rest of the plans. In other words, here's what's critical, and we've determined the priority, and now all the rest of the incident response and contingency and all the rest of those guys should follow along. Okay. So incident response, page 186. Most organizations have run across this before. They've probably done this before. They had a service out, or maybe an employee deleted something, and perhaps they did it even without a formal plan. But on the other hand, maybe you need to have an honest-to-God real, incident response planning team. Somebody gets together and talks about this. For example, if there's only 2 people that can perform a backup of a database, let's just say, for example, then you might say, 2 is not enough. We need to train somebody else. That kind of stuff. You need to work this out. So incident candidates versus an honest-to-God real incident. Here's the things that might happen. Okay. So they talk about getting started. This is the incident response. So I'm preparing, detection and analysis, containment and eradication. I love that. And then some sort of a post-incident activity. Now I will tell you, this is important. An after-action report. That's what the Army calls these things. Let me give you an example. So I had oh dang! I hate when I do that. I don't even know what I clicked on. Okay, here we go. It's completely hypothetical. You get called out in the middle of the night because a server burped, and you go out there and you decide, I just need to reload the operating system because I don't know what's going on. I'm just going to wipe this guy out and restore from backup. And so you say, well, where's the install media? And they go, oh, well, that's in the supervisor's office. Well, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. Is the supervisor there? No. Is the door locked? Yes. Do I break down the door? I mean, this ought to be part of the thing you talk about. It's like this stuff, the activation keys and the recovery media, that stuff has to be available to the people who are doing the response. It'd be like saying the firemen show up, but the fire extinguishers are locked in a cabinet. Like, come on, you got to think this stuff through. Okay, so here's how you basically start the incident response life cycle. So when you find these things, then you go back to the prep team and say, we need to make some changes. Okay, I'll give you another one, and this one's kind of subtle. Let's say you have a fantastic plan on how to restore a server. First you're going to install the operating system, and you're going to get patches, and you're going to go here and you're going to get the all the applications. You're going to do all the patches and all the stuff, and then you're going to install, do the data and all the detailed step-by-step instructions so that practically anybody on an incident response team could come in and perform the work. But the document is stored as a Word document on the server, the very server that's down. Wow. So no one can get to the instructions because it's on the server that is currently down. So yeah, after action report, you bet. You got to spend a lot of time on that. So they talk about the cybersecurity framework. I mentioned there's a lot of these things. This is like a checklist of all the things. So this is from that NIST 800-61. Detection and analysis, determine whether an incident has occurred. Analyze, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Prioritize the handling of the incident relevant to fact. Report the incident. Contain if you can. Acquire or preserve or whatever. Contain the incident. Eradicate the incident, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of a framework. Identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So this is pretty straightforward stuff, I think. I mean, it kind of makes sense. Identify what's wrong, try to solve the problem. It could be, for example, that let's just say you're under attack from a hacker. Well, maybe the solution is just turn off the internet. Now, sure, that's going to kill sales and lots of other things. But, again, it depends on what your priority is. If your priority is no one can have this data, well, then screw sales. We need to make sure this data is safe. Okay? Cool. All right. An incident response policy. It talks about the scope and the roles and responsibilities and prioritization and contact information. And for God's sake, contact information. Let me just tell you, we had a call-out sheet, okay, in one of my previous incarnations. And this is like if you had an emergency, you had to call these numbers. Okay. So I was a junior person. And they said, I want you to verify these numbers. I went, oh. So I started calling them. And I'm not kidding. About a third of the numbers were no longer good. This is the period of time when people were getting rid of landlines and switching to cell phones and stuff. And so, yeah, there was an awful lot of the phone numbers that just flat didn't work. Anyway, an incident response policy is really to gain support from top management. For example, if back in the day we had beepers, this is before cell phones, you had a beeper and you took home and so one person at the hospital, took the beeper home for a week, and then the next person took it home for a week, and the next person took it home for a week. And so if there was a problem, it kind of divvied up the responsibility. But was there a pay increase if you had to take the beeper home? Whether or not you got called, was there a pay increase? Because you couldn't be 1,000 miles away when it was your week to have the beeper. Okay? So is there a pay increase? Yes, that's the kind of thing that we need to be talking about in this plan. If you plan on calling somebody out, having them on standby incurs a cost. Okay. So during an incident, junior managers will tend to forget priorities and just demand, I don't want to be first. Like, you're going to have the balls to say no. And again, that's why top management support is kind of important. It's like, no, I'm doing what the CEO says to do, not what you say to do. And it's absolutely critical that you establish and maintain that chain of command, with a specific one person in charge of the incident. We call them a captain, but you don't have to have a name. Which individual is going to be in charge. To include, if I need to buy something in the middle of the night, then I don't want to have to, ask Mother, may I, and who's got the credit card, and I'm supposed to have, 3 bids, and I'm supposed to have this documentation. No. This is an emergency. I need to buy this stuff right now. So I need to have a credit card that I can have access to. Maybe it'll be one of those break glass to, kind of things on the wall. I mean, I'm being a little facetious, but, something that you don't use normally, but you may have to use that kind of stuff. And you have to have top management's approval to say, yes, this is acceptable. Okay, so incident response planning. So you can't prevent the thing, right? But you can certainly talk about it. You can talk about it to the point where you plan all this stuff before you have to deal with it. So how will a team communicate with the rest of our organizations? So you can't assume that the phones are going to be working. You can't assume that email is going to be working. So what do you do? I mean, you can't put something up on the web page. If you're having a really, really bad incident, maybe none of those things are working. Maybe email and web and phones are all out. So how do you communicate? It's a little less complicated now with cell phones, I'll confess. You could call the CEO and say, look, we're having a problem. So there's a computer security incident response team, a CISIRT. The first question is, who's in charge? So you may have someone calls out because there's a suspicious activity. And so it's mostly guards, guns, and gates at this point. And then someone else says, well, we probably need to call the security folks. And so when that happens, the baton gets passed from the gate guards to this CSRT. So technical group for performing actual response. So think about on that team should be a database administrator if that's required. And have, fluid membership depending on the problem. If the problem is the web page, well, you don't need a database guy, that kind of stuff. So maybe I need a programmer. Maybe I need somebody who's, can do installs with admin rights to the server and that kind of stuff. And all these things have to be available for anyone to be able to call. So just a team. And then there's other people that get called, that are not on the team and don't have a beeper and don't get paid. But they're going to get a phone call at the house saying, look, I need your help. Okay. And again, management has to be able to say, obviously, we're going to cover this with, you have the authority to pull somebody out on overtime. Okay. So again, talking about the on-site guard force, they may be aware of what's going on, right? Maybe not. So there's 3 phases in a computer security incident response team, detection, reaction, and recovery. There's a checklist that talks about, here we go. So I identify what the problem is. I try to protect the stuff, which could mean disabling internet, detecting whether there is really a cyber attack at all, figuring out what to respond, remediating the problem, and then we're into the recovery page, tactical recovery and strategic recovery and all the rest of that stuff. So this is kind of sort of the way it works. Now, identifying the problem. This may sound a little crazy, but it's typically the users of the system who are telling you that you have a problem. If you're under a cyber attack and somebody's doing a denial of service, it's going to be your customers calling up saying, hey, we can't get in. And you go, oh. So it's probably not going to be the guard force, right, that's going to be detecting this. Unless, of course, they're walking around and they find a door that's been left open. They go, ooh, okay. So kind of sort of depends on the situation. Hey, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark. You guys know how this works.